You know, when we think of the pests that have shadowed humanity for centuries, our minds almost always leap straight to the rat. But today, we're not focusing on the big guy. We're going to dive deep, really deep, into the story of its tiny and frankly more sinister accomplice, a creature that has absolutely mastered the art of survival and disease transmission.
Right. So we see a rat, and we immediately think of the diseases it might be carrying. But what if the real danger isn't the rat itself, but the highly specialized parasite that it's carrying? This tiny passenger is an absolute masterclass in biological engineering, and its whole existence is built around spreading disease.
So to really get a handle on this thing, we've got to start with the basics. Who is this creature really? We're going to build a profile, breaking down exactly what it is and where it fits into the grand, complex tree of life.
Okay, first things first. This is not some simple, single-celled blob like a protozoan. Nope, Nosopsyllus fasciatus is a metazoan. What that means is it's a complex, multicellular animal. It's an arthropod, a true insect with a segmented body, a tough exoskeleton, and jointed legs. Way more sophisticated than you might think. And it's what we call an ectoparasite. This is a really crucial distinction. It doesn't burrow deep inside its host's organs or bloodstream. Instead, it lives its entire adult life on the outside, hanging out in the fur, on the skin, and depending completely on its host's blood to eat and reproduce.
Now, this table might look a little academic, but it's basically the flea's formal address in the biological world. It's in the order Siphonophora, that's all fleas, and the family Ceratophyllae. And what's so cool about this family is that it's a relatively modern group that actually co-evolved right alongside the rodents they love to feed on. They grew up together, so to speak.
And get this, the name itself is basically a giant warning label. Nosopsyllus is a mashup of the Greek words for disease and flea, and fasciatus is just Latin for banded because of the stripes on its abdomen. So from the very moment scientists named it, it was literally known as the disease flea with the stripes. Doesn't get much clearer than that.
Okay, so let's see how this all comes together in the flea's life cycle. This isn't just about being born and dying. It's more like a 4-act play, a survival drama that is perfectly, and I mean perfectly, tuned to the life of its rodent host.
The whole process is what scientists call a complete metamorphosis. It all starts with these tiny, almost see-through eggs which are laid in the rat's nest, not on the rat itself. Smart, right? Then, this egg hatches into a blind little worm-like larva that eats all the gunk in the nest, including, and this is key, the dried blood and the poop of adult fleas. From there, it spins a little cocoon, becomes a pupa, and waits, before finally emerging as that blood-sucking adult.
But here's the really wild part. The adult flea doesn't just pop out of its cocoon whenever it feels like it. No way. The pupa is basically a biological landmine. It's a patient little predator, waiting, sometimes for months, for the perfect signal. It needs to feel the vibrations of a rat moving nearby, sense its body heat, and detect the carbon dioxide it breathes out. This timing is genius. It guarantees that the second it emerges, its first meal is just one jump away.
And once it starts feeding, it becomes an incredibly efficient delivery system for disease. It's got 3 main ways of doing this. First, it can literally regurgitate bacteria right into the bite wound. Second, its poop can be loaded with pathogens, and when the host scratches the itchy bite, they accidentally rub it right into their skin. And third, it can be an intermediate host for things like tapeworms, infecting a new host that just happens to swallow it.
Which, of course, brings us to the serious part, the clinical impact. What actually happens when these fleas decide to bite a human, and one of these transmission methods works? Well, the consequences can range from just annoying to life-threatening. So on the most basic level, you have the bite itself. The flea's saliva has anticoagulants to keep the blood flowing, and our bodies have an allergic reaction to it. That's what causes those super itchy red bumps. And because a flea will often probe the skin a few times before it finds the perfect spot, the bites often show up in a classic line or a cluster of 3. You might have even heard this called breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But those itchy bites are really nothing compared to the main event. This table shows the real danger. Nosopsyllus fasciatus is a known carrier for some of history's most notorious diseases. We're talking Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind the plague. It's also a vector for Rickettsia typhi, which causes murine typhus. And yeah, it can also give you a nice case of the rat tapeworm, Hymenelepis diminuta. It's a real rogues gallery.
So given these incredibly high stakes, how do scientists and doctors actually figure out if they're dealing with this specific flea? And how do they diagnose the diseases it carries? Well, the methods have come a long, long way.
evolving from just looking at it under a microscope to actually reading its genetic code.
So, back in the day, identification was all about microscopy. An entomologist would painstakingly look for key physical clues. Its rounded head, the fact it doesn't have the little mustache spines that a cat flea has, and a very specific comb of 18 to 20 spines on its back. But today, our modern molecular toolkit gives us faster and way more precise answers. We can use DNA barcoding to ID the species from a single leg, or a technique called MALDI-TOF to generate a unique protein fingerprint in just minutes. It's pretty amazing.
When it comes to diagnosing the infection in a person, doctors have a very similar high-tech toolbox. They can use serology, which means looking for the antibodies your body creates to fight the pathogen. They can use rapid antigen tests, which are crucial in the field for getting a quick diagnosis of something like plague. And of course, there's PCR, which can find and amplify tiny traces of the pathogen's DNA from a patient's sample with incredible accuracy.
All right, for our final section, let's talk about how we fight back. Knowing the enemy is one thing, but how do we beat it? The good news is that the bacterial diseases this flea carries, like plague and murine typhus, are treatable with common antibiotics like doxycycline, as long as you catch them early. But honestly, the best fight is the one you never have to have, which is all about prevention.
And there's a really fascinating and proactive strategy that comes from the Netherlands. Their public health rules are crystal clear. If you have a rat infestation, you have to treat the area for fleas before or at the same time as you get rid of the rats. And why is that? Well, think about it. If you just remove the rats, you're suddenly left with thousands of hungry, homeless fleas that are desperately looking for their next meal, and that could very well be you or your pets. So when you boil it all down, prevention really rests on these three pillars. First, manage your waste. If there's no food for the rats, you'll have fewer rats and fewer nesting spots for the flea larvae to grow up in. Second, seal up your buildings. Block any entry points to deny rats a place to live. And third, and this is the big one, always follow that key rule. Control the fleas first.
And just so you know how we put this all together, this entire explainer on Nosopsyllus fasciatus was researched and compiled using a Gemini deep search. If you're curious and want to go even deeper into the science, we've put a complete, detailed list of all our sources in the Notebook LM document that's linked right in the description. And that kind of leaves us with one final big thought to chew on. We know that rat populations are not just surviving, but thriving in our cities all over the world. So the question we really have to ask ourselves is this: are we truly prepared for the resurgence of their oldest and maybe their most dangerous companions?
Hey, if you found this deep dive interesting, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button for more explainers just like this one. And please, we'd love to hear from you. So leave your questions and any feedback in the comment section below. We really do read all of them, and your engagement helps us create more of this content. Thanks for watching.